Hello, Dankey Kang gang. In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about anarchism because it's kind of the hot new thing. A lot of leftists, especially new leftists, find themselves attracted to anarchism. And I don't blame them. It gets a lot of popularity, especially in the West. Folks like Noam Chomsky even get big media appearances. Noam Chomsky, of course, being a prominent anarchist thinker, he pretty much exposed me to the ideas of leftist anarchism. I had already been exposed to the ideas of anarcho-capitalism, which is sort of an oxymoron. Here in the US, we call it libertarianism, but it's anarcho-capitalism nevertheless. I was also sort of introduced to anarchist thought through anarcho-pacifism, which was a philosophy I held back when I was a Christian, back when I was still religious, and it was sort of me hanging on to the last vestiges of my spiritualism, trying to incorporate that into a sort of political philosophy that I felt Jesus would agree with, and that of course was a political philosophy with no organized state and also non-violent. So needless to say, I didn't really continue on with that philosophy. I went through like a brief period of liberalism, and like a lot of people in the rising up of Bernie Sanders in 2016, I found myself introduced to the concept of democratic socialism for the first time, and I decided to look at what the heck socialism was and what it wasn't. I learned that socialism was when the workers controlled the means of production. And so I didn't know what the means of production was. That's kind of a strange term. We don't really use that term very much here in the West outside of like Marxist thought. So my big goal at that point was trying to understand all this leftist lingo: the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, the means of production, class struggle, all of these concepts. I didn't really know what they meant, and so I had to do a little bit of digging and look up just what people thought about all this. So I looked up a bunch of different things about Marxism, Marx, and the USSR, and I think like a lot of people, I heard a lot of stuff about how the USSR abandoned true socialism and how they turned to this authoritarian dictatorship that was really no better than fascism, and that Stalin was this evil butcherer of millions and millions of people, and he was essentially just a horrible, cruel dictator with a vicious society of worship built up around him. And so there is this sort of narrative among Western leftists that any sort of socialism that follows the tradition of Marx and Lenin is one that is not really socialism. It's authoritarian socialism, which, of course, to anybody who reads Lenin laughs at that, because, or anyone who reads Marx or Engels would laugh at that, because of course I think it was Engels that first used the term dictatorship of the proletariat, and that's exactly what a Marxist revolution calls for, is a dictatorship of the proletariat. So yeah, I mean, if you call a society in which you have a dictatorship of the proletariat an authoritarian society, then you should just as well consider the society in which we currently live, a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, to be just as authoritarian, if not much, much more so. So, it's really splitting hairs, and this is an issue that I have with a lot of anarchists when they criticize the Soviet Union. They dismiss most of its achievements outright as being the accomplishments of just this autocratic, authoritarian regime that was just brutally repressive, and in doing so, they find themselves repeating common Western propaganda points that really don't serve the true history of the Soviet Union and of socialism. And if we're going to be an enlightened movement of socialist revolutionaries, we need to understand the entire picture. And I feel like a lot of anarchists, by ignoring the achievements of Lenin, Stalin, Mao, and the rest of Marxist-Leninism, that they are ignoring just the greatest accomplishments of communism. Because after all, an anarchist society, they have been established in the past. You can look at things like the CNT-FE in Catalonia. You can look at the current movement in Rojava. And don't get me wrong, I support those two movements. I think that they were good in principle. I just think that they are poor in practice. And so this gets down to really the crux of my argument against anarchism, is that you may be able to have a revolution in which you go to a form of socialism, in which you have this sort of horizontally organized society, but without this sort of central apparatus of the state and the sort of division of labor and organization that comes along with that. You won't have the kind of military capacity to defend your holdings. You won't have any way to secure your borders from capitalist intrusion. So, you won't have any sort of means to repel the inevitable onslaught of capitalist imperialism that will just come barreling towards you the second that they catch a whiff of your socialist revolution. So all that is to say, I think in history, when we have seen anarchist movements come about, they've been very poor in their ability to really fight back against imperialism. Let's just look at the CNT-FE, for example. I mean, they had a natural ally in Republican Spain. And what they should have done is ally themselves with the Republicans, and then after they had defeated the fascists, work out their differences. Maybe they could have maintained some form of autonomy in Catalonia, but they didn't get a chance to do that, ladies and gentlemen, because they decided that the Republicans were statist scum, just like the nationalists. And that's the kind of foolish thinking that I think really cements anarchism as being ultimately not a constructive philosophy when it comes to the left. How are you going to stop imperialism with an anarchist society? Another big problem with it I have is how, without a state apparatus, how are you going to develop the industrial sector enough to produce the superabundance of commodities needed for true communism? Because if you actually read Marxist theory, you have to have that socialist development of industry, that socialist development of an enormous stockpile of resources from which everyone can draw freely to each according to their need. That is the core of Marxism. And then once you have that, once everyone's material needs can be met, and they want for nothing, you will see a natural withering away of the class system and the state, which it reinforces. So ultimately, the goal of anarchism and Marxist-Leninism is the same. The end goal is the same: a stateless, classless society. Anarchists just think we can jump the gun around the entire dictatorship of the proletariat, development of the socialist state phase, and just get straight to the communism. But I'm sorry, friends, it doesn't work that way. History has shown it to be so. But let me know what you think. That these are just my humble thoughts. I will remind everybody, though, that people who are called tankies have often done the greatest accomplishments for communism internationally. I mean, look at people like Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Lenin, Stalin, Ho Chi Minh. All of these people are called tankies. And when people call me a tanky, I guess I'm proud. I'm proud to be counted among folks the likes of Che Guevara. If that makes me a tanky for wanting to implement Marxist-Leninist practices to overthrow capitalism, then I guess I'm a tanky. Dang it. Consider this video like part 1 in a defense of being a tanky. Yeah, so come at me, anarchy bros. I dare you. I do like talking to people. You know, I'm not one of those tankies that absolutely despises anarchists. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to have a reasonable discussion with somebody. So yeah, I mean, you know, hit me up in the comments, like, subscribe, all that stuff.